Welcome back to Bargirl, Baddies. Today's story comes from a bloke who thought he'd cracked the code, thought he'd found something real in the neon chaos of Pattaya, thought he was different from all the other tourists stumbling through Walking Street with beer bellies and bad decisions. His name is Connor, he's 28 years old, from Brisbane, Australia, and he learned the hardest way possible that leaving the bar doesn't mean leaving the life behind. She quit for him, moved into his condo, played the girlfriend role so convincingly he actually believed it. But the second his bank account hit zero, she was back on that same bar stool like he'd never existed. This is a story about rescue fantasies, about the lies we tell ourselves when we're desperate to matter to someone, and about the brutal moment when the illusion shatters and you're left holding nothing but receipts and regrets. So drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you've ever fallen for someone who was just playing a part, hit that like button and subscribe, because chances are you're not alone. Before we get into Connor's words, let's paint the picture of where he was before Thailand ever entered his mind. Brisbane, 2023, late autumn, when the heat finally breaks and you can breathe again without sweating through your shirt. Connor was working as a sparky, an electrician doing commercial contracting, pulling decent money, nothing spectacular but enough to save, enough to have a plan. He had a ute, a one-bedroom unit in Koh Peru, and a routine so predictable he could have set his watch by it. Monday through Friday on job sites. Fridays at the pub with the same 5 mates he'd known since high school, Saturdays recovering, Sundays at his parents' place for roast dinner and polite questions about when he'd settle down properly. He'd just come out of a 3-year relationship with a girl named Amy. She was nice enough, worked in marketing, had opinions about which cafes made the best smashed Avo, talked about buying a house together in the outer suburbs where they could afford something with a yard. Connor had gone along with it because that's what you did, right? You met someone, you dated, you moved in together, you started looking at interest rates and arguing about whether to get a dog first or just go straight for kids. But somewhere in year 2, Connor realised he felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not excitement, just this flat, grey numbness, like he was watching his own life happen to someone else. Amy ended it before he worked up the nerve too, which somehow made it worse. She'd met someone at a work conference, some marketing manager with better hair and a better car, and within a month she'd moved out and moved on. Connor's mates told him he dodged a bullet, that he was better off, that there were plenty more fish in the sea, all the cliches that mean nothing when you're lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering why you weren't enough. That's when the YouTube algorithm got him. He'd been watching random stuff, footy highlights, tradie comedy sketches, and then, one night after a few beers, a video popped up. Some British bloke in his 30s, walking through a beach town in Thailand, talking about how he was living on 800 quid a month, had a girlfriend 20 years younger, spent his days at the beach and his nights at bars where a beer cost less than a coffee back home. Connor watched it twice. Then he watched 10 more videos just like it. Passport Brothers channels, expat vlogs, retirement forums for blokes half his age, all saying the same thing: you could escape, you could start over, you could matter. The idea planted itself and grew roots fast. Connor had about 40,000 Australian dollars saved, money he'd been putting aside for a house deposit that now felt like a prison sentence. Why was he killing himself for a quarter-acre block in Logan when he could live like a king somewhere warm? Why was he working 60-hour weeks for a future that looked exactly like his parents' lives, comfortable and completely soul-destroying? 2 months later, he quit his job. His boss thought he was insane. His mates thought it was a phase. His mum cried and said he was throwing his life away. But Connor felt something he hadn't felt in years: excitement. He sold his furniture, put his ute up for sale, packed everything he cared about into a single backpack, and booked a one-way ticket to Bangkok. The flight itself felt like shedding skin. 14 hours in economy, watching movies he didn't absorb, drinking tiny bottles of wine, feeling the weight of expectation lift with every kilometre between him and Brisbane. When the plane touched down at Suvarnabhumi Airport and he stepped out into the arrivals hall, the heat hit him like stepping into a sauna fully clothed. It was 3 a.m. and still 30 degrees, the air thick and wet and smelling like jet fuel and street food impossibility. Bangkok was overwhelming in the best way. Connor had booked a cheap hotel in Sukhumvit, nothing fancy, just a base while he figured things out. The first few days blurred together, walking until his feet ached, eating pad thai from street carts, getting ripped off by taxi drivers, drinking Chang beer on rooftop bars, feeling gloriously anonymous in a city of 10 million people who didn't know or care about his failed relationship or his arbor-donned career. But Bangkok wasn't the end game. The videos had all talked about Pattaya, about how it was cheaper, more laid back, where the real expat community lived. Connor had connected with a few Australian blokes in a Facebook group, and they said they'd show him around if he made it down there. So after a week in Bangkok, he caught a bus south, 2 hours through industrial sprawl and then sudden green, until the highway curved and he caught his first glimpse of the ocean. Pattaya hit different. It wasn't pretty in any conventional sense. The beaches were average, the traffic was chaos, and the whole city had this faded resort vibe, like someone had built a party town in the 80s and just kept adding to it without ever cleaning up. But it had energy. Walking Street pulsed with neon and noise even in the afternoon. Bars stacked 3 stories high, blasting techno and rock and Thai pop. Girls in bikinis and heels calling out to every passing bloke. Beer promoters shoving flyers in your hand. The smell of grilled seafood mixing with cigarette smoke and sea salt. Connor met up with the blokes from the Facebook group at a bar in Soi Buakau. They were older, 40s and 50s mostly, Aussies and Brits who'd retired early or were living off online income or just burning through savings slower than they would back home. They bought him beers, told him which areas to avoid, which visa agents were legit, where to get a decent steak, and most importantly, they told him the bar scene wasn't as complicated as it looked. Just relax, have fun, don't fall in love, and you'll be fine. That last part should have been a warning, but Connor was 28 and convinced he was smarter than the old blokes who'd been played. He wasn't going to be one of those guys sending money to some girl's sick buffalo. He was just here to have a good time, reset his head, figure out what came next. He started going to Walking Street most nights, bar hopping, playing pool, watching Muay Thai on big screens, letting bar girls sit with him because it was part of the culture and he wasn't going to be uptight about it. Most of them were nice enough, professional, knew exactly how to make you feel like the most interesting man in the room for the duration of your drink. Connor could see the game, appreciated it even, tipped well and never took it seriously. Then he met Nock. It was a Thursday, not particularly busy, and Connor had wandered into a smaller bar off the main strip, the kind of place that didn't have the aggressive promoters outside. The music was quieter, some old Thai rock ballad, and there were only a few customers scattered around. Nock was behind the bar washing glasses, and when Connor sat down, she smiled but didn't immediately launch into the script. She just asked what he wanted to drink, poured his Leo, and went back to her work. Connor found himself watching her. She was pretty, but not in the flashy way some of the other girls were. No heavy makeup or exaggerated friendliness. Just natural, tired looking, around the eyes like she'd been doing this too long. She had her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, was wearing jeans and a bar t-shirt instead of the usual club wear. And when she caught him staring, she raised an eyebrow like she was amused rather than interested. They started talking, small stuff at first. Where you from? How long you here? You like Thailand? Connor's Thai was non-existent and her English was decent but limited, so they met somewhere in the middle with a lot of gestures and laughter when things got lost in translation. She taught him how to say hello properly, how to order another beer without sounding like a complete tourist, and when he butchered the tones, she laughed in this genuine way that made him feel like she was laughing with him, not at him. Her name was Nock, which she said meant bird in Thai. She was 26, from somewhere up north he'd never heard of, had been working in Pattaya for 3 years. When he asked the usual questions about why she did this work, she just shrugged and said, same reason as everyone, money. But she didn't elaborate, didn't give him the sob story he'd heard variations of at other bars, and somehow that made her feel more real. Connor started coming back to that bar every night. Not because he was obsessed, he told himself, just because it was convenient and the beer was cold and Nock was easy to talk to. She'd sit with him during slow periods, and gradually the conversations went deeper. She told him about her daughter, 5 years old, being raised by her mother upcountry because Pattaya was no place for a kid. She told him about her ex, the father, who disappeared the moment she got pregnant, how she'd tried working in a factory in Bangkok, but the pay was garbage and the hours were brutal, and she'd barely made enough to survive, let alone send money home. The bar was better money, she said, but she hated it. Hated the customers who thought buying her a lady drink meant they owned her time. Hated the mama-san who took a cut of everything. Hated going home at 4 in the morning smelling like smoke and shame. But what choice did she have? Her daughter needed school fees. Her mother needed medicine. And this was the fastest way to provide. Connor felt something shift in his chest. This overwhelming urge to fix it. To be the solution to her problem. He started paying her bar fine every night. The few hundred baht that meant she didn't have to entertain other customers, could just sit with him, talk, leave early. She protested at first, said it was too much, but Connor insisted. It felt good, being generous, being the good guy in a city full of selfish bastards. 3 weeks in, sitting on the beach at 2 a.m, sharing a bottle of Sangsom, Connor asked her the question that had been building. What if she didn't have to work at the bar anymore? What if he helped her out, just for a while, until she found something better? She could be his girlfriend properly. No more bar, no more customers, just them. Nock looked at him for a long time, and Connor couldn't read her expression in the dark. Finally, she said she couldn't accept that. It was too much to ask. But Connor pushed, said he wanted to, said he had savings and no real plan. And maybe this was exactly what he came to Thailand for. To help someone. To matter. 2 weeks later, Nock gave her notice at the bar. Connor rented a 1-bedroom condo in Jomtien, nothing fancy but clean, with a balcony that caught the breeze and a view of the street below. Nock moved in with a single bag of clothes and a smile that made Connor feel like a hero. Those first weeks felt like everything the YouTube videos had promised. Waking up next to her, the sunlight streaming through thin curtains, her making coffee in the little kitchen while he sat on the balcony watching motorbikes stream past. They'd take his rented scooter down to the beach, spend hours in the water or just lying on towels under an umbrella, eating somtam from beachside vendors. Nock would cook in the evenings. Proper Thai food that made his little condo smell like lemongrass and chili, and Connor would sit there thinking he'd figured it out. He'd found the thing everyone back home was searching for and never finding. He took photos of everything, sent them to his mates back in Brisbane with captions about living the dream, and when they asked if he was coming back, he honestly didn't know why he ever would. The thing about dreams is they feel most real right before you wake up. Connor and Nock settled into a rhythm that felt like domestic bliss, or at least his version of it. Mornings slow and lazy, her curled up next to him scrolling through Thai TikTok while he checked footy scores from back home. Afternoons at the beach or riding the scooter up the coast to quieter spots where the water was clearer and the tourists fewer. Evenings cooking together or hitting up cheap Thai restaurants where a full meal cost less than a coffee in Brisbane. It felt easy, natural. Like this was how life was supposed to be. But comfort has a way of breeding complacency, and Connor stopped paying attention to the small things that should have raised flags. Nock had said she'd look for normal work, maybe at a salon or a restaurant, something that didn't involve bars or tourists. She'd start looking next week, she said. Then next week became next month. Then she stopped mentioning it altogether. And Connor stopped asking because honestly, he liked having her around all day. He liked feeling needed, liked being the provider, liked the way she'd kiss him goodbye when he went to meet his expat mates for afternoon beers and be waiting when he got back. The money started moving faster than he'd planned. Connor had budgeted for himself, maybe 1,500 Australian a month, which went far in Thailand. But now there were 2 of them, and Nock's expenses kept appearing like items on a menu he hadn't ordered. She needed to send money home to her mum for her daughter's school fees. Then her daughter got sick, needed to see a doctor, needed medicine. Then her mum's roof was leaking and needed repair before rainy season. Then her brother crashed his motorbike and needed help with hospital bills. Every request came with tears, or gratitude, or both. Nock would show him messages from her family, photos of her daughter looking thin or sad, and Connor's chest would tighten with this overwhelming need to fix everything. He'd transfer the money, sometimes 3,000 baht, sometimes 10,000, watching his bank balance drop while telling himself this was temporary, that he was investing in their future, that this was what love looked like when it wasn't selfish. His expat mates started making comments. "Careful, mate," one of them said over beers at a soy brakau bar. "They all have sick buffalo and broken roofs." Connor had laughed it off, said Nock was different, said they didn't understand because they were just paying for company while he had something real. The blokes had exchanged looks but didn't push it, and Connor felt vindicated, like he'd proven he was the exception to their cynical rules. 4 months in, Connor checked his bank app one afternoon while Nock was showering. He'd been avoiding looking too closely, doing the mental math that told him he was fine, but the actual number hit him like cold water. He'd burned through nearly 20,000 Australian dollars, half his savings. Gone. Rent, food, motorbike rental, Nock's family emergencies, nights out, visa runs, and 1,000 small expenses that added up faster than he'd ever imagined. Panic set in, the kind that makes your hands shake and your breathing shallow. He sat on the balcony, doing calculations, figuring out how long the remaining 20,000 would last at this rate. 8 months, maybe 10 if he was careful. Then what? Go back to Brisbane broke and defeated. Beg for his old job back. Move into his parents' spare room at 28. When Knock came out, wrapped in a towel, Connor tried to bring it up gently. Said maybe they needed to be more careful with money, maybe she should start looking for work seriously, maybe they could cut back on sending so much home. Knock's face crumpled immediately. She said she understood, said she was sorry for being a burden, said maybe she should just go back to the bar if he couldn't afford her anymore. Connor backtracked instantly, hating himself for making her cry, for being the guy who put financial pressure on someone he claimed to love. He held her and promised it was fine, they'd figure it out, he was just stressed, but it wasn't her fault. She kissed him and said she loved him and promised she'd be more careful, and Connor chose to believe her because the alternative was admitting he'd made a terrible mistake. The dynamic shifted after that conversation, subtle at first but unmistakable, once Connor started noticing. Knock became more distant, always on her phone, typing in Thai and switching apps when he got close. She said it was just chatting with friends from her village, with her family, nothing important. But the frequency increased, and sometimes he'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and see the phone's glow illuminating her face as she typed furiously, then locked it when she noticed him stirring. She started going out more without him, said she needed to visit a cousin who was in town, or meet up with an old friend from her bar days who was having problems. Connor wanted to be the cool boyfriend who didn't ask questions, who trusted completely, so he'd say, sure, have fun, and spend the evening alone in the condo watching Netflix and drinking Chang until he passed out. The drinking had increased generally. It was so easy here, so cheap, and all his expat mates did it, day drinking at beachside bars, night sessions that bled into morning. Connor told himself he didn't have a problem. He was just embracing the lifestyle, just doing what you did in Pattaya. But some mornings, he'd wake up and not remember getting home, would check his bank app and see transactions at bars he didn't recall visiting, and the anxiety would spike again before he pushed it down with a breakfast beer and a swim in the ocean. Knock's requests for money didn't stop despite her promises. Now her daughter needed a new school uniform, now her mother needed surgery, now her brother needed to pay back a loan shark. Each story was plausible enough, came with enough emotional weight that Connor couldn't say no without feeling like a monster. He started transferring smaller amounts, trying to set boundaries, but Knock would go quiet for days, barely speaking, making him feel the coldness until he gave in and sent more. 6 months into living together, Connor met up with one of his expat friends, a British guy named Dave, who'd been in Pattaya for 5 years. They were sitting at an outdoor bar in Jomtien when Dave asked how things were going with Knock. Connor gave the standard answer, "Great, really good, we're happy." Dave nodded slowly, then said something that stuck like a splinter. "You know she's still in contact with the bar, right? I saw her there last week, chatting with the mama-san." Connor's stomach dropped. He tried to play it casual, said, "Maybe she was just visiting friends, catching up." Dave shrugged, said maybe, but also maybe not. Said he'd been exactly where Connor was once, with a girl who quit the bar for him, but never really quit the life, and by the time he figured it out, she'd cleaned out his condo and disappeared. That night, Connor tried to bring it up with Knock, asking casually if she'd been by her old bar recently. She said yes, just to say hi, just to check on friends. Why, was that a problem? Her tone was defensive, almost aggressive, and Connor backed down immediately, said no, of course not, he was just curious. But the seed of doubt had been planted and was growing roots. The slide accelerated. Connor started noticing money missing from his wallet. Small amounts at first, 500 baht here, 1,000 there, easy to dismiss as his own poor accounting after drinking. But then his ATM card went missing for a day, reappeared in a different pocket, and when he checked his account there was a withdrawal he didn't remember making. When he asked Knock about it, she said he must have been drunk and forgotten. Maybe he was. He couldn't be sure anymore. Knock started staying out later, sometimes not coming home until morning, smelling like cigarette smoke and liquor. She'd say she'd been at a friend's place, that they'd been drinking and she'd fallen asleep there. Connor wanted to believe her, but his gut was screaming that something was wrong. He'd lie awake, listening for her key in the door, checking his phone obsessively, feeling pathetic and angry and desperate all at once. One morning, Connor woke up around 11, head pounding from the night before, reaching for Knock and finding empty space. Not unusual lately, she'd been sleeping in the living room some nights, said the bedroom was too hot. But when he got up and walked through the condo, she wasn't there. Her phone was off, messages unread, and a cold feeling settled in his chest. He tried calling throughout the day. Nothing. Checked with the security guard downstairs, who said he'd seen her leave around 8 in the morning with a bag. Connor told himself she'd probably gone to visit family up country. Probably her phone died. Probably she'd be back tonight with an explanation. She wasn't. 3 days passed. Connor was frantic, messaging her constantly, calling her friends whose numbers he had, getting vague responses or silence. He barely slept, surviving on instant noodles and beer, playing out scenarios in his head from kidnapping to accidents to her just deciding she was done with him. On the 4th day, Connor was sitting at a beachside bar trying to drink himself numb, when one of the bar owners he knew casually, a Thai guy named Somchai, sat down next to him. Somchai ordered them both whiskey, looked uncomfortable, then said he needed to tell Connor something. Nok was back at her old bar on Walking Street. Had been for over 2 weeks now, working regular shifts. The words didn't process at first. Connor said that was impossible, she'd only been gone 4 days. Somchai shook his head, said no. He'd seen her there multiple times over the past weeks, always late at night, sitting with customers. The night she'd said she was visiting friends, she'd been working. The morning she came home smelling like smoke and booze, she'd been working. Connor felt something break inside his chest. This physical sensation like his ribcage was collapsing. He finished his whiskey, ordered another, then another, until Somchai cut him off and called him a taxi. That night, drunk and stupid and needing to see it for himself, Connor went to Walking Street. He found the bar easily, the same one he'd first met her in, and stood across the street in the shadows watching through the open front. And there she was, Nok, wearing the same outfit she'd worn when they met, sitting on a bar stool next to an older white guy, laughing at something he said, touching his arm in that practiced way Connor had thought was special when she'd done it to him. He watched for 20 minutes, saw her accept a lady drink, saw her leaning close to the customer, saw the whole performance he'd convinced himself she'd left behind. Other girls walked past her, chatted with her like she'd never been gone, like the past 6 months hadn't happened. Connor must have moved into the light, or made some sound because Nok glanced up and their eyes met across the street. For a second, he thought he saw something. Guilt, maybe, or recognition, or sadness. But then she just looked away, turned back to her customer, and kept laughing. Connor walked back to his condo, the 2 kilometers feeling like swimming through concrete. Everything looked different now. The neon harsher, the music too loud, the whole city revealing itself as exactly what everyone had told him it was. He'd just been too arrogant to listen. Back in the condo, he saw it clearly for the first time. Her stuff was gone, not recently, but gradually. The clothes she'd accumulated had been disappearing for weeks. The little personal items she'd brought, even the photos she'd stuck on the fridge. She'd been moving out in stages, while he'd been too drunk or distracted to notice. The condo that had felt full was now just empty rooms with his stuff scattered around, evidence of how thoroughly he'd been played. Connor sat on the balcony until sunrise, scrolling through photos on his phone. Them at the beach, her laughing into the camera, her cooking in the kitchen. Them on the scooter, her arms wrapped around his waist. Every image now recontextualized, every smile a performance, every moment of tenderness just part of a transaction he'd been too stupid to recognize. He wasn't special. He wasn't different. He wasn't her hero or her savior or her boyfriend. He was just another customer who'd paid more than usual for the girlfriend experience, and the moment his credit ran low, she'd moved on to the next one. The reflection came slowly, painfully, over the following weeks, as Connor tried to piece together what had actually happened versus what he'd told himself was happening. He didn't leave Thailand immediately. Couldn't afford to, ironically. He found cheap work teaching English under the table, moved to a shittier condo to save money, stopped going to bars entirely. In the quiet moments, usually late at night when he couldn't sleep, Connor forced himself to be honest. Nok hadn't really lied to him. She'd never claimed to love him, not first. She'd never promised forever. She told him exactly who she was, a bar girl supporting her family, and he'd decided to rewrite her story into something it wasn't because he needed to be someone's hero. Because back in Brisbane, he'd felt invisible, and here he'd felt important, and he'd confused financial leverage with genuine connection. The family emergencies were probably real, or real enough. The daughter existed, the mother existed. The need for money was genuine. What wasn't genuine was the premise that leaving the bar meant leaving the life. That few months of support would fundamentally change who she was or what she needed to survive. Connor had offered her a temporary solution and gotten angry when it didn't become permanent, when she'd made the rational decision to return to more reliable income. He didn't blame her entirely, which surprised him. He was angry, humiliated, financially devastated, but underneath that was this uncomfortable understanding that he'd constructed the whole fantasy himself. She'd just participated in it for as long as it made sense. The lesson was brutal, but clear. You can't buy love, or loyalty, or transformation. You can rent the appearance of these things, and if you're lucky or unlucky enough, you can convince yourself the appearance is real. But the moment the transaction ends, so does the illusion, and what you're left with is the truth you'd been paying to avoid. Connor spent another 6 months in Thailand, saving every baht he could, living like a monk, avoiding the expat crowd who all knew his story by now. When he finally had enough for a flight and a small cushion, he went back to Brisbane. His old boss took him back, surprised but not particularly curious about where he'd been. His mates asked a few questions, but Connor kept his answers vague. His parents were just relieved he was home. He moved back into his old unit, picked up his old routines, and from the outside probably looked like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Connor had paid roughly 25,000 Australian dollars for a 6-month lesson in humility, in the difference between what you want to be true and what actually is true, in the reality that desperation makes you stupid and arrogance makes you blind. He couldn't get the money back, couldn't undo the experience, couldn't even fully regret it because it had fundamentally altered how he understood himself and his place in the world. Sometimes, sitting at the pub with his mates when they started talking about Thailand trips or showed him videos of beach parties and bargirls, Connor would smile quietly and change the subject. Because some stories aren't meant to be told over beers. Some lessons are meant to be carried alone, heavy and permanent, insurance against ever making the same mistake twice. So that's Connor's story. And if you think it can't happen to you, that you're smarter or more aware or immune to the fantasy, you're probably already halfway there. The Bargirl savior complex is as old as Pattaya itself, maybe older, rooted in this fundamental human need to be important to someone, to matter, to rescue and be needed in return. And there's an entire industry built on feeding that need for as long as your money holds out. Connor wasn't stupid. He was human. He was lonely and lost and looking for purpose in a place specifically designed to sell purpose back to you at market rates. And the tragedy isn't that he fell for it. The tragedy is that right now, as you're listening to this, there are 100 guys just like him making the exact same decisions, convincing themselves they're different, that their situation is special, that love works differently when you're the one feeling it. If you've been through something similar, drop it in the comments. If you know someone heading down this path, maybe share this video. And if you're in Thailand right now, sitting in a bar, paying someone's rent and telling yourself it's different this time, just remember Connor. Remember that leaving the bar doesn't mean leaving the life, and that the girlfriend you're supporting might just be taking a temporary break before returning to more reliable customers. Thanks for watching Bargirl Baddies. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this, real experiences from real people trying to navigate the gap between what Thailand promises and what it actually delivers. And remember, the dream is for sale, but it's still just a dream. See you next time.